In this video, we will create a basic navigation in Jetpack Compose. So let's get started with creating a new project in Android Studio. As you can see, I'm using the high contrast theme for Android Studio to better show the code that I'm typing. New project. I press empty compose activity and then next. Let's name our project compose navigation. Other settings are fine. Package name, save location, and API version. I press finish and wait for the project to be created. Alright, let's hide the project explorer from the left. And I'm going to use the presentation mode for showing the code so that you can see the code better. Appearance, start, presentation mode, enter presentation mode. Okay, it's already in presentation mode. Good. And the first thing we need to do in order to work with navigation and create a navigation in our Compose application is to go to our project explorer, to Windows and project, and then in our build.gradle file for the app module, we are going to make sure that we have the navigation dependency for Compose added. So if we search for navigation, we see that it's not already in the list of dependencies, so we need to add it. At the bottom of my file, at the end of the list for dependencies, I add implementation, androidx.navigation, and then the compose artifact for the navigation library, navigation compose. And then because I don't know the exact latest version of this library, I use a minimum version like 100 alpha 1 and then press alt and enter to get benefit from and to take advantage of Android Studio's intelligent version recognition, and the latest version is changed to 2.4 alpha 8. Okay, and also a newer version of the Compose library is available, so I updated to the latest version, which is 102, and I can find it in my build.gradle file for the whole project. By the way, I press Ctrl Shift and N to search for a file, and once I made that change, I press sync now and wait for the project to be synced with these new changes. Alright, now let's get back to main activity by pressing Ctrl and Tab. And first I remove the composables added by Android Studio and also the content inside my theme. I'm gonna use my own content that will display the navigation that I will create. I create a composable function that will contain my screens for the navigation and definition of my Navhost. So I name it my screens. The first step in creating a navigation in Compose is creating a nav controller. So I create a nav controller or navigation controller. I name it nav controller, and you initialize it with remember nav controller. which returns a navigation controller or Navhost controller. Its type is a Navhost controller. Alright. Then we use that nav controller to create a nav host or a navigation host that will contain the definitions of my different screens and different parts of my navigation graph. So nav host, as you can see, there are two ways of creating it. I use the second form, which takes a nav controller, a start destination, and other parameters. So nav host, and for nav controller parameter I pass in my nav controller variable, and for start destination I pass the root of the default destination or default screen that I want to be displayed. Usually this start destination or start screen is called home, so I name it home. I pass in home, and later I need to create a destination with this root name. And for the builder, which is a lambda, I move it outside of the parentheses like this, which allows me to construct my navigation graph. The way we create our navigation graph inside our nav graph builder block is by calling a composable, the composable function, which we need to import from androidx.navigation.compose by pressing Alt and Enter. And it contains a root string. For the first one, I pass in home, and I define its root as home, which is the default destination for my navigation graph. And for its content block, I'm gonna specify the screen that will be displayed as home. So I name it home screen, but it doesn't exist yet. I need to create a screen with this name, a composable with this name. And since I'm going to have several different screens, I'm going to call composable several times. So composable for the second screen, let's create a screen called B root. Its root is called B root. I name it this way. You can name it whatever you want. And I'm gonna use another composable inside it later, of course. Another screen, C root. Another screen, D root. Each of these roots that I'm using will be used to navigate to a different screen. And composable E root. You can continue adding different composables here, and with each of them you will basically create a new destination that allows you to navigate to a different part of your application. So now let's create different composables that we will use inside our destinations. So first, home screen. You can simply Alt and Enter by clicking on home screen, and then select create composable function home screen. It creates a composable function with that name. So inside that, I'm going to define a column that will contain several buttons to different screens. So let's add a modifier to it. Import modifier. and then fill max size, also background. For the default screen, let's use a background of red. Import color. And now let's add our buttons. I'm gonna add several buttons so that I can click them and then navigate to other screens. I add a button to go to screen B, and then another button to allow me to go to screen C. Alright. Also, let's add an alignment parameter. So horizontal alignment, I'm gonna align them in the center. Alignment.center horizontally, and also vertical arrangement that allows me to use arrangement.center and arrange my items in the center. And for the first button, when it is clicked, I need to access the nav controller so that I can navigate to screen B. And for that, I need the nav controller. So I need to pass in nav controller to home screen. So I define nav controller, Navhost controller as a parameter to home screen. And when calling home screen, I pass in nav controller to it. This nav controller is passed to home screen. So let's define our other screens like V screen, C screen, D screen, and E screen. Composable V screen. And for this, I'm gonna use a box modifier, fill max size, the background of blue, and let's also use a text element inside it. Screen B. Let's use a style for it. Material theme dot typography dot h1. This will show a big text inside my screen. Let's also align it in the center with modifier alignment.center. This will align the text element in the center of my box. And for those composables that don't have a parameter, I can make them preview so that I can see a preview, but let's skip that for now and just continue creating our screens. Fun C screen. We can finally see our output on the emulator. Let's make it composable. Actually, I'm gonna copy the content that I have inside B screen and paste it inside C screen because they are very similar, just the color is gonna be different for C screen and also the text. In fact, that's not true, because C screen, I'm gonna do something different in C screen. I'm gonna move from C screen to other screens. So here I'm gonna add a column I add a modifier to it. Modifier fill max size, and the background color dot yellow. And then I'm gonna add two buttons here. One of the buttons is supposed to go to screen D, and the other is supposed to go to screen E. And because we need to perform a navigation inside C screen, we need to pass in nav controller to C screen. So back to our C screen. We haven't called it yet. We go to the definition of nav graph builder and C screen. I pass in nav controller to it when calling it. Also for our second root and for our B screen, we need to call B screen. And then for D root, I need to go to D screen. And for E root, I need to go to E screen. Note that these two screens don't exist yet, so I will create them next. I type comp and press enter to create a composable. I name it D screen. It will be a simple screen using a box. I create it. Modifier fill max size, background color dot magenta, let's use for this screen, with the text D screen or screen D, with a style that shows the font size big, material theme dot typography dot h1 I use, and then a modifier that allows me to see the text in the center, alignment dot center, and then let's move to the next composable, E screen, a box, modifier fill max size, background, let's use a background color of cyan, this for this one, and then a text element, screen E, again the style parameter, material theme dot typography dot h1, and modifier dot alignment dot center. Alright, we have created our screens. For C screen, let's perform the navigation inside our onClick block, and here when the button for D screen is clicked, then we move to D screen. So I use nav controller and then navigate to D root, which navigates me to the D screen. And when the button for screen E is clicked, then I go to E screen. Again, I use nav controller and then navigate to which I pass in eRoot. And before these, we also have other buttons that we need to take care of. Button for screen B that is supposed to take me to screen B. I use nav controller and then navigate. broot, and then we have the button for screen C that navigates to screen C. Its root is called croot. Note that all of these routes that we are navigating to have to be defined as part of our navigation graph. If you don't define them, your application will crash. So we have start destination home, and you can see that it is part of my navigation graph. And I have broot, croot, droot, and eroot. Each of them are available inside my navigation graph, so whenever I have access to nav controller in my code, I can navigate to each of these different routes. Alright, let's test our application on the emulator by calling our myScreens composable inside the setContent block, and then in turn compose navigation theme block, myScreens. Let's run the application. Alright, our application is launched. The buttons are looking very awful. Let's add some padding to our buttons. In our home screen we have two buttons. Let's add some padding using the modifier parameter for the button. Padding 8 dep should do it. Let's import padding and dep. For the second button as well, modifier padding 8.dep. We also have two buttons in our C screen that in turn will allow me to navigate to two other screens. So I add some padding to them as well. Modifier padding 8dep. Modifier for the second button in my C screen. Padding 8dep. And also let's pay attention to how it is constructed in terms of its alignment and whether it will look good or not. Our column doesn't have an alignment parameter here, so I add horizontal alignment, the center horizontally as its value, and also arrangement, vertical arrangement dot center. All right, they will be arranged in the center, and let's see how it looks now. Let's run it. Okay, we are in our home screen. Our home screen doesn't show any text that we are inside our home screen, so I add one. This is my home screen, so I add a text element. Material theme typography.h1 for its style, and Let's run it. Alright, this is my home screen, and in this screen you can see that I have two buttons, screen B and screen C. When clicking the screen B button, I will be able to navigate to the B screen composable. There we go, I'm in the B screen. To navigate back, I press the back button. I'm in home screen again. Now I want to go to screen C. I press screen C button. I go to screen C, and here I can go to two other screens, and as you can see, screen C doesn't have the text that I wanted to see, and because I haven't added that, I don't see any text. I added text, screen C, style, material theme dot typography dot h1, and it will hopefully be shown now. And because I don't want my text to be covered with these buttons, I'm gonna change the arrangement a little bit. Top center, use arrangement dot top, and now my text will hopefully be following my two buttons that I have here. Let's run it again. Okay, go to C screen, and in C screen I can go to screen D or D screen, screen E, and the back button, I press the back button, return back to the previous screen, which is screen C, and from here I can again press the back button and move in my navigation graph back to the home screen. There we go. So you can see that basically you can navigate from every navigation node to another node in your navigation graph. Here we used our home screen to navigate to screen B and screen C, and then from screen C we moved in our navigation graph to screen D and screen E. We can also we can navigate back to screen A. As I said, there's no limitation as long as you are navigating to a route that is defined in your navigation graph. So for example, I can add another button inside my screen C to move to screen A. So screen C, I can add another button. Screen A, or home screen actually, because I don't have a screen A, I have home screen. And I can use nav controller to navigate to home. Let's add some padding. Modifier, 8 depth. Also in our home screen, let's add some padding and preferably some alignment to our text. So in our home screen, for the big text that we have, let's add some padding. Padding of 8 depth, and we are inside a column, so I can center it vertically, align, I can center it horizontally. Let's run our application again. Alright, as you can see, we have screen B and screen C, I move to screen C from screen A or home, and here I have another button that will take me to home. If I click the back button, I will go back to screen C, and then if I press the back button again, I will then move back in my back stack to screen home or home screen, and if I press the back button once more, I will exit the application because it is the initial item in my backstack entry. So basically you see that it might seem a little bit overwhelming because I created a lot of screens, but it's basically very simple. All you need to do is to create a nav controller and then a Navhost that contains the definitions of your navigation graph, different components of your navigation or nodes of your navigation, and then you can navigate back and forth between those nodes. For example, I navigated from home to B and C routes, and then I added navigation from C route or C screen to D route and E route, and I also added navigation from C route to home. So that's it for basically how you create a navigation in Jetpack Compose. In the next video, I will show you how you can pass parameters to your navigation destinations in Jetpack Compose navigation system.